Greetings to you. The regimental commander exploded with such force that the window panes in the headquarters hut rattled and almost flew out of their frames. After a lengthy and emotional tirade, accompanied by loud shouts and threats, he issued a reprimand to the pilot and then, as if in counterpoint to anger, unexpectedly announced a commendation, which they say completely nullified the previous penalty. This unexpected shift from anger to mercy caused no less surprise than the reprimand itself. This pilot, a twice hero of the Soviet Union, took an honorable fourth place in effectiveness among all the Soviet Air Force during the war. However, his efficiency was truly incredible, going far beyond the ordinary. During the war, he made 250 combat sorties, and in those sorties and 49 air battles, he personally shot down 55 enemy aircraft. And another 5 aircraft were shot down by him as part of a group. There were days when Nikolai Giliev shot down 3, 4, and on May 30th, 1944, even 5 enemy machines in a single day. Legend has it that the submission for his third Gold Star of the Hero of the Soviet Union was submitted even earlier than that of the famous Alexander Pokryshkin. It is said that the decree on the award was even signed and prepared for publication, but due to some unpleasant incident in which the ace got involved, the decree was canceled and the award never took place. The details of this incident remain the subject of controversy and speculation to this day. Nikolai Giliev was born on February 26, 1918, in the Stanitsa of Oksayskaya, located 25 versts from Novocherkassk, the then capital of the Don Cossack host, and 17 versts from Rostov-on-Don. His father worked as a locksmith at the factory of the Grigoriev & Co. partnership, which specialized in the production of agricultural machinery, in the neighboring city of Nakhichevan-on-Don. His mother took care of the household and the upbringing of her only son. The family managed to avoid participation in the tragic events of the Civil War. After nationalization, the plant was renamed Krasny Oksay, and Nikolai's father continued to work there to feed the family during the difficult, hungry years of the 20s and 30s. He also worked as a fisherman on the Don, taking his grown son with him. Fishing became Nikolai's lifelong hobby, and his father taught him how to work and master the locksmith and carpentry trades. Like most of his peers in the Stanitsa, Kolya, as he was called in childhood, was a defiant and quarrelsome boy, never missing an opportunity to fight with both peers and older boys. Together with 2 of his friends, he kept the whole neighborhood in fear. Seeing them from afar, adults tried to hide in their houses as quickly as possible. However, with age, Kolya calmed down. After graduating from the 7-year school, he entered a factory and vocational school, FZU, received a profession, and began working at the same factory where his father worked. Young man was very skilled, earned well, and even dreamed of getting a higher engineering education, although this promised a lower income, but prestigious work and the respect of others. In the early 1930s, there was an atmosphere of general enthusiasm for aviation in the country. The party actively promoted the idea of conquering the skies, putting forward the slogan, "Komsomol members, get on the plane." Aero clubs and parachute towers of Osoaviakim appeared even in the smallest cities. The passion for flying did not pass by Komsomol member Giliev, however. The Rostov Aero Club refused him, advising him to first finish the 8th grade. Nikolai heeded the advice and attended evening classes at the School for Working Youth, Shrim, for 2 years, having received a certificate of incomplete secondary education. In 1936, he joined the Aero Club and for the first time independently took to the air in a UT-1 aircraft designed by the outstanding aircraft designer Alexander Yakovlev. In 1938, Giliev was drafted into the ranks of the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army, RKK. A year later, he was accepted as a candidate for membership in the VKPB and sent to the Stalingrad Military Aviation School. Giliev was eager to get to the Finnish front, but the war had already ended by the time he graduated from the school in the summer of 1940. Having received the rank of junior lieutenant, he was sent to Mogilev to the 162nd Fighter Aviation Regiment. armed with I-16 fighters designed by Nikolai Polikarpov, known by the unofficial name Donkeys. In the first days of the war, the regiment was forced to relocate to the Baranovichi region. The city was occupied by the Germans on the sixth day of the war, but even earlier, the Luftwaffe struck the runway of the regimental airfield, and the pilots had to abandon their aircraft and retreat on foot or in the remaining cars. After mastering the new Yak-1 fighter, developed by the world-famous designer A.S. Yakovlev, Giliev was transferred to the 423rd Fighter Aviation Regiment, IAP, whose task was to protect important railway junctions and industrial enterprises in the rear from air attacks. The squadron in which Giliev served was stationed in the city of Gorky, now Nizhny Novgorod, which was subjected to 43 air bombings by the German Air Force in the first 2 years of the war, almost 36,000 incendiary and high explosive bombs were dropped on the city, the Molotov automobile plant which produced T-70 light tanks, and the river port. Despite the city's rear status, there was plenty of work for the pilots. One day, while returning from patrol, the M105 engine of Giliev's Yak fighter, designed by Vladimir Klimov, suddenly stalled. Not such a rare occurrence for engines of that time. Giliev showed miracles of flying skill, with difficulty landing the damaged machine in a small clearing. The plane, at the same time, buried its nose in a hill. The regimental commander, Major Dmitry Zaitsev, who arrived at the scene, instead of the criticism expected by Giliev for the damaged aircraft, praised him for his demonstrated skill and ability to save his life in a critical situation, noting that the life of a pilot is more valuable than any equipment. After this incident, Giliev, with his high qualifications, was transferred to the front line to the 27th IAP. Here's a plane, get in and fly. On the night of August 3, 1942, the aviation regiment was alerted to intercept enemy bombers. However, Giliev, who did not have permission for night flights, was left on the ground. One of the technicians joked at him. Here's a plane, get in and fly. Giliev, succumbing to the provocation, got into the cockpit of the Yak, took off, discovered a Heinkel He-111 bomber, and attacked it, shooting it from below. A night landing of an aircraft requires considerable skill and mastery, but Giliev landed successfully. The regimental commander, Major Vladimir Bobrov, flew into a rage. His shouts were so loud that all the windows in the headquarters hut rattled. After a stormy confrontation, to everyone's surprise, he issued Giliev a reprimand, and then, no less unexpectedly, a commendation, which canceled the reprimand, and signed a submission for the assignment of the rank of lieutenant to Giliev. This action by the regimental commander emphasized Giliev's outstanding flying qualities. In the spring of 1943, in the Belgorod region, the 27th IAP provided air cover for troops and important rear area objects. Giliev, inspired by the recognition of his flying skills, sometimes got carried away and lost his vigilance. On May 14, 1943, the squadron in which Giliev was patrolled the airspace over the airfield. There was no radio communication on the Yak-1. The pilots had to rely only on their eyesight. Nikolai was the first to notice a group of Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, covered by a pair of Messerschmitt Bf-109G fighters. Realizing that the dive bombers were the main danger, Giliev attacked and set one Junker on fire, then, making a combat turn, attacked another Stuka. But having used all his ammunition, he cut off the tail of the bomber, using the wing of his plane. The Junker went down and Giliev's Yak went into a spin. Giliev managed to eject with great difficulty and deploy the parachute at an extremely low altitude. The remaining Junker dropped its bombs far from the airfield, and the entire German group retreated without success. The real combat work for Giliev began only in May 1943, and his finest hour came during the battles on the Kursk Bulge. To support the advance of ground troops, the Germans concentrated significant air forces in this area. 2,300 aircraft of the best models. The Luftwaffe set itself the task of destroying Soviet airfields and supply bases. disrupting the transfer of reinforcements by rail and destroying frontline communications. The Soviet High Command allocated 2,700 aircraft for the Battle of Kursk, which was not enough to ensure numerical superiority. Therefore, Soviet pilots had to conduct significantly more sorties to prevent the Germans from achieving their goals. On July 5, 1943, the first day of the Soviet counteroffensive, Guliyev, at the head of a group of fighters, flew 6 combat missions, personally shooting down 2 Junkers and 2 Messers. The entire group shot down 16 enemy aircraft that day. By the end of July, Senior Lieutenant Guliyev shot down 12 aircraft, 10 personally and 2 in a group. In September 1943, he was awarded his first Gold Star of the Hero of the Soviet Union. After the victory in the Battle of Kursk, in the late summer of 1943, the 27th IAP was removed from combat operations to master the new American P-39 Airacobra fighters, supplied under the Lend-Lease program. It was a single-engine, all-metal monoplane with an engine located behind the pilot's cockpit and a characteristic front landing gear. This layout had its own peculiarities. Aircraft often fell into a flat spin. The front landing gear required a change in technique during takeoff and landing, and the side door of the cockpit, instead of the traditional canopy, significantly hampered emergency exit from the cockpit in case of danger. At altitude, the P-39 developed a speed of up to 600 km per hour, was armed with a 37mm cannon, 212, 7M, and 47, 62 machine guns. All Airacobras were equipped with radio stations. The Americans delivered almost 5,000 such fighters to the USSR. 3-time hero of the Soviet Union Alexander Pokrishkin and many other twice heroes flew on Airacobras and highly valued their combat qualities. 2/3 of the 60 enemy aircraft shot down by Guliyev personally and in a group fell during his service on the P-39. On October 9, 1943, the 27th IAP was transformed into the 129th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, and Guliyev was appointed squadron commander. The regiment participated in the fierce battles for the Dnieper and the right bank Ukraine. The squadron under the command of Guliyev performed almost 500 sorties, shooting down 75 enemy aircraft in 150 air battles. By the end of the war, the regiment took an honorable 5th place in effectiveness among all fighter aviation regiments of the Soviet Air Force. Guliyev developed his own unique aerial combat tactics, based on a surprise attack from an advantageous altitude, which allowed him to take an advantageous position relative to the enemy. He strove to shoot down an enemy aircraft on the first approach, minimizing the consumption of ammunition. Therefore, he often managed to shoot down several aircraft in one sortie. He was a virtuoso of maneuver, accurately hitting targets even at extreme distances. Guliyev actively imposed air combat on the Germans, which they disliked very much. Becoming a squadron commander, Guliyev was not limited to training pilots on the ground, constantly holding post-flight debriefings, but also personally demonstrated air combat techniques. Flying as part of his squadron, his command, "Do as I do," was not just an empty phrase. The pilots were happy to fly with him, knowing that their commander would never leave them in trouble and, if necessary, would sacrifice himself to save his comrades. Understanding the importance of group interaction, Guliyev often recorded downed aircraft on the account of the pilot who covered his tail, allowing him to concentrate on attacking the enemy. His subordinates reciprocated this behavior. On May 30th, 1944, German and Romanian troops launched an offensive in the direction of the city of Iași. After a powerful 1-hour artillery barrage, the Germans bombed the positions of the 2nd Ukrainian Front of Army General Radia Malinovsky in the area of the village of Skuliany. On that day, Captain Guliyev made several combat sorties over the front line. 6 Airacobras of his squadron encountered 30 Junkers Ju-88 bombers, covered by 16 Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters. A fierce air battle ensued, during which the Germans shot down 5 Soviet aircraft, but lost 10 of their own. half of which were shot down personally by Giliev. However, forgetting his brilliant success, he reproached himself for taking 3 insufficiently experienced pilots in a battle. The next day, he again took to the sky in tandem with the regimental commander, Lieutenant Colonel Valentin Fedoshev, at an altitude of 3 kilometers. 56 Airacobras met 2 groups of enemy fighters with a total of 62 machines, while covering his leader during an attack by 2 Messers. Giliev came under intense fire and was wounded in the arm. He barely made it to his airfield, landed the damaged aircraft, and lost consciousness. This was Giliev's first and last wound during the entire war in the regiment. They nicknamed him the Charmed One. At the time of the wounding, he was only 26 years old. On July 2nd, 1944, newspapers published a decree awarding Captain Giliev the title of Twice Hero of the Soviet Union. 2 months later, Giliev was summoned to Moscow. And on September 9th, Mikhail Kalinin, the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, presented him with his second Gold Star. On the same day, Grigory Rechkalov received his second Hero Star, Alexander Pokryshkin his third, and Andrei Trud his first. The next day, the newspaper Izvestia published a photograph of these glorious pilots, who had a total of 8 Hero Stars, returning from the Kremlin. There is a version that soon after this, Giliev caused a serious brawl in a restaurant, which deprived him of his third Gold Star. It is said that the decree on the award was even issued, but then it was canceled. However, there is no documentary evidence for this story, and the authors of these stories themselves do not specify the dates of the decree's issuance and publication. Giliev won his last aerial victory on August 12, 1944, shooting down a Focke-Wulf FW-190 Wurger fighter west of the city of Stasso. There were rumors that he was offended by the fact that he was deprived of his third star, but most likely this is not true. The injury he received on August 31st was serious enough. The mobility of his hand was not fully restored, and the doctors forbade him to fly. Giliev was appointed the regimental navigator, and he almost completely stopped flying, focusing on planning combat operations on the ground, developing routes, and training young pilots. 2 months before the end of the war, Giliev was sent to study at the N.E. Zhukovsky Military Air Academy. He arrived in Moscow in a captured Opel Kapin car, deciding to visit his former division commander, Lieutenant Colonel Leonid Gorglyat. He met his younger sister Nina, a medical student, at his home. They went for a ride in the car, and although Giliev was an excellent pilot, he had little experience driving a car, and he did not have a driver's license at all. As a result, the Opel overturned, the driver's door jammed, and Nina pulled the unconscious Giliev out through the passenger door, giving him first aid. At that moment, Giliev unexpectedly hugged her, which greatly frightened her. 6 months after this accident, they got married. After graduating from the academy, Giliev commanded an aviation regiment in Taganrog, not far from his hometown, aviation divisions in Yelets and Yaroslavl, an aviation corps in Rzhev, graduated from the Military Academy of the General Staff, and received the rank of Major General. From 1966, he commanded the 10th Separate Air Defense Army, PVO, in Arkhangelsk and received his second General Star. This army was one of the first to receive the latest military equipment. Giliev was actively involved in the development of ice airfields on the islands of the Arctic Ocean, taking off and landing on them himself, training pilots, and creating a vast network of radar stations. In the harsh Arctic climate, with air temperatures down to minus 60 degrees Celsius and strong winds, up to 100 kilometers per hour, daily service often bordered on heroism. To walk only 200 meters from headquarters to the command post, it was necessary to stretch a special cable. Otherwise, it was simply impossible to reach. Sometimes polar bears came to the operators of radar stations, which caused serious problems. In some cases, the bears had to be shot, which caused an international scandal. In 1973, Giliev, already a colonel general, arrived on an inspection to a unit beyond the Arctic Circle and saw that the soldiers were on duty with bare hands. He never minced his words and unleashed such a storm of obscene curses on the unit commander that no one had ever heard from him before. Mittens were apparently in storage, but it was impossible to deliver them in 2 hours. Seeing the soldiers in mittens, Giliev severely reprimanded the unit commander, accusing him of indifference to his subordinates, and upon returning to headquarters, he signed an order to strip the lieutenant colonel of 1 star. Under Giliev, new military towns, hospitals, kindergartens, schools, and cultural centers were built in the north. In the late 1960s, Giliev secured the allocation of land and building materials on the Black Sea coast and on Napa for the construction of a sanatorium for the children of officers serving in the north. But his only daughter, Tatiana, never visited there. After the death of Nikolai Giliev, the sanatorium was named after him. In November 1974, Giliev was appointed deputy commander of the air defense forces of the country, but 2 years later he was unexpectedly demoted. The new Minister of Defense of the USSR, Dmitry Ustinov, transferred Giliev to the position of assistant to the commander of the Moscow Air Defense District for Engineering. Giliev did not like staff work, and after celebrating his 60th birthday, he requested retirement. His request was granted. He lived quietly in his dacha, which he had built, with his personal funds, taking care of his grandchildren, going fishing, not using a service car, and resting with his wife once a year at a sanatorium of the Ministry of Defense. On September 27, 1985, a colonel general and twice hero of the Soviet Union was too shy to ask for an official car and, taking his suitcase, ran to the bus, fearing he would miss his train. He had a heart attack, from which Nikolai Giliev died before the ambulance arrived. He was 67 years old.